$50. That's all she's worth.
Please, don't do this.
Come with me.
Who are you?
Someone they should have feared.
Fiona Vance never dreamed that the grand marble steps of her own childhood home would become the auction block for her dignity. For a crumpled $50 bill, her stepmother, Evelyn, cast her out, selling her like scrap to a battered, ragged wanderer off the street. Clutching a battered leather case and a stained linen dress, Fiona wept as her stepsister Chloe howled with laughter, her hand on her hip in gloating triumph. Evelyn pointed a manicured finger toward the gate, smirking in her emerald velvet gown, satisfied that she had finally wiped the Vance bloodline from the estate. What neither of them saw beneath the torn jacket, the dirt, and the fresh cut across his cheek was the lethal stillness in his dark eyes. They believed they had thrown Fiona away to a worthless vagrant. In reality, they had just placed her directly into the hands of Seo Hwi, the supreme feared dragon of Seoul's criminal underworld, lying in wait. They thought they were discarding a broken heiress. Instead, they had just signed their own death warrant. Before we dive into how this ruthless power dynamic turns upside down, tell me, if the people who stole your birthright traded you away for pocket change, would you seek absolute ruin or simply walk away into the light? Drop your thoughts below and let us know what city you are reading from. Now, let us step back to see where Fiona's nightmare began. Golden dawn crept across the towering pillars and manicured lawns of the Vance estate. Yet for Fiona, morning never arrived with the luxury of waking up slowly. Long before Evelyn and Chloe stirred beneath their silk sheets, Fiona was already on her knees in the cold corridors, her hands scrubbed raw from polishing the very floors her late father had laid by hand. Evelyn insisted that servants must begin their toil in the dark, conveniently ignoring the bitter truth. Fiona was no servant. She was the sole rightful heiress to every brick of the empire, reduced to a ghost in her own home. The kitchen air smelled of scorched tea and polished brass, a cold reminder that the warmth of the Vance estate had died with Arthur Vance. 6 months had passed since her father's sudden passing, yet the silence he left behind was deafening. In his absence, Evelyn and Chloe had stripped the mansion of every photograph that bore Fiona's smile, locking away his will and reducing his only child to an unpaid maid in threadbare cotton. Every ache in Fiona's back told the story of their cruelty. From dawn until past midnight, her routine was an unbroken chain of demands. If the porcelain teacups held a single water spot, Chloe would deliberately tip hot Earl Grey across the hardwood for Fiona to wipe on her knees. If the grand entryway lost its high-gloss sheen, Evelyn would threaten to throw Arthur's remaining personal journals into the garden incinerator. Fiona bore every insult in silence. Her defiance lived not in sharp words, but in her refusal to break. Whenever the exhaustion threatened to pull her under, she pressed a hand against the small silver locket concealed beneath her dress. Inside was a tiny, faded picture of her father lifting her onto his shoulders in the estate's rose garden. "You are made of iron and grace, my little bird," he used to whisper when life grew harsh. "Never let the world convince you that you are small." Those words were her fortress. She remembered the sound of his deep, steady laugh echoing through the high-ceilinged library, the way he would leave fresh pastries on her desk while she studied, and the fierce promise in his eyes whenever he spoke of her future. He had built this grand empire for her, stone by stone, intending it to be her sanctuary, never imagining it would become her cage. As the morning bell chimed from the second-floor master suite, Fiona drew a steadying breath, smoothed down her apron, and gathered the heavy silver breakfast tray. The stepsister's shrill laughter already echoed down the grand staircase, sharp and mocking. They owned the deed, the money, and the power to command her every waking second. But as Fiona looked up at the towering chandelier, her jaw set with quiet resilience, she knew one thing they could never touch: the blood in her veins and the unyielding strength her father had left behind.
The scent of damp autumn hung heavy in the air as Fiona dusted the grand gallery. Her hands trembled with fatigue, the silver locket beneath her bodice heavy against her chest. On the mahogany mantel sat the last piece of her mother's legacy, a delicate, hand-blown Venetian vase woven with veins of gold. A sudden sharp shove sent Fiona stumbling forward. Chloe breezed past with a cruel smirk, murmuring an insincere apology as her elbow clipped Fiona's arm. The vase slipped. Time seemed to stop as the fragile glass met the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. Before Fiona could even gasp, Evelyn stormed into the hall, her green velvet gown sweeping behind her like poison ivy. She didn't look at Chloe's gloating face, her gaze locked onto Fiona with cold, calculating fury. "You clumsy, worthless parasite," Evelyn hissed, her voice slicing through the vaulted room. "You've destroyed the last valuable thing in this house. You aren't worth the air you breathe, let alone another day under this roof." "It was an accident. Chloe pushed." "Silence," Evelyn snapped. A twisted idea sparked in her dark eyes. "You owe this household a debt, Fiona, and today you will pay it." Dragged down the marble corridors by the wrist, Fiona was thrust out the grand double doors into the chilly afternoon mist. Waiting near the iron perimeter gates was a lone figure, a man in a battered, threadbare jacket, hair falling over his bruised face, his posture still as stone. Evelyn marched down the front steps, dragging Fiona like discarded luggage, tossing a small worn case at the girl's feet. "Hey, wanderer!" Evelyn shouted, her voice ringing across the courtyard. She held up a crumpled $50 bill, then sneered down at Fiona. "Take her. $50 and this useless stray is yours. Get her off my property and do whatever you want with her." Chloe burst into wild, vindictive laughter from the top step, resting her hands on her hips as she mocked Fiona's tear-stained face. Evelyn pointed a sharp, diamond-ringed finger toward the road, reveling in the ultimate humiliation of her late husband's child. Fiona's knees buckled under the weight of utter betrayal. She looked up through her tears, expecting brutality from the drifter. Instead, the stranger stepped forward. His battered boots made no sound against the wet stone. When his calloused hand took hers, his grip was unexpectedly firm, yet strikingly gentle. As he pocketed the bill without a word, he turned his gaze back toward the grand estate. Beneath the fringe of dark hair and the bloody scratch on her cheekbone, his eyes held no trace of weakness, only an ancient predatory darkness that promised retribution. With a quiet nod, he pulled Fiona into his stride, leading her from the gilded cage and into the unknown. The cold drizzle turned into a steady downpour as they navigated the winding alleys of Seoul's forgotten outskirts. Fiona kept her head bowed, clutching her small leather case with white-knuckled desperation. She braced herself for cruelty, for cramped squalor, or for the rough demands of a desperate vagrant. Yet the man ahead never rushed her. His pace matched her tired stride, his silent presence shielding her from the bitter wind like an unyielding wall. Eventually, he steered her through a narrow passage shielded by overgrown ivy and heavy steel doors. Fiona's breath caught. Behind the weathered stone exterior stood a secluded, fortified sanctuary. It was immaculate and profoundly still, surrounded by high walls and reinforced blackout glass that kept the chaos of the city far at bay. The heavy door clicked shut with the heavy thud of an electronic lock. Fiona shrank against the entryway, her body trembling in her damp linen dress, waiting for whatever nightmare was meant to follow her $50 exile. The man turned.
In the soft amber light of the foyer, his fierce silhouette softened. He reached for a fresh, thick towel from a shelf and offered it to her without stepping too close. Dry off before the chill settles in your chest. His voice was low, gravelly, but striking in its calm authority. He led her into a warm, open kitchen where the faint aroma of roasted barley tea lingered. While Fiona stood rooted to the hardwood floor, he set a steaming bowl of rich chicken stew and fresh rice on the counter, alongside a folded stack of clean, soft wool blankets. He didn't tower over her. He didn't demand obedience. He simply sat the worn $50 bill on the edge of the polished wooden table between them. "My name is Seo Hwi," he said quietly, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that held neither pity nor malice. "Eat, rest. No one will lay a hand on you here." Fiona blinked through burning tears, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Seo Hwi glanced toward the heavy iron gate visible through the courtyard window. "Nothing. You are not a prisoner, Fiona. The door is unlocked. When the rain clears, if you wish to run, take this money and go wherever you please. But if you have nowhere left to turn, you are safe under this roof for as long as you need." For the first time in 6 agonizing months, the suffocating knot in Fiona's chest loosened. The grand mansion of her father had offered only torment, yet this strange, quiet haven and the mysterious wanderer who had bought her freedom offered her the one thing she had forgotten existed: dignity.
The scent of sweet brioche and yeast-warm bread became Fiona's gentle awakening each dawn. In the small neighborhood bakery, just 3 streets down from the safe house, her bruised spirit slowly began to mend. The elderly owner, Mrs. Song, had gladly taken on the quiet young woman with the gentle hands, teaching her the rhythmic cadence of kneading dough and dusting flour across marble counters. For the first time since her father's death, Fiona woke not to sharp insults and cruelty, but to the soft chime of a shop bell and an honest wage tucked inside an envelope. Her days transformed, and with them the hollow ache in her chest began to soften. Color returned to her cheeks, and the linen rags were replaced by simple, comfortable clothes she earned herself. Yet amidst this newfound tranquility, the presence of the man who had sheltered her remained an enigmatic, protective shadow. Seo Hwi rarely spoke of himself. Most evenings he waited quietly near the street corner just as dusk settled over the district, casually walking a few steps behind her on her journey home. He still wore his worn jacket and kept his dark hair tumbled low over his brow, blending into the working-class haze of the alleyways. Yet the streets did not treat him like an ordinary drifter. Fiona noticed it first on a rainy Tuesday. A gang of heavily tattooed men in leather jackets, the kind who usually shook down market stalls and terrorized passers-by, were lounging near the alley entrance. Fiona's breath caught, her old instincts screaming to brace for torment. But as Seo Hwi approached beside her, his hands buried deep in his pockets, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The rowdy men fell dead silent, their swagger evaporated into rigid, trembling discipline. As Seo Hwi walked past without sparing them a glance, every single enforcer pressed their hands flat to their sides and bowed deeply at a sharp 90-degree angle, holding their breath until his footsteps faded into the distance. Fiona watched from the corner of her eye, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the scarred street vendors lower their eyes in reverent terror whenever he bought fruit. She heard the hushed whispers of rough men parting like the sea whenever his silhouette crossed the pavement. "Seo Hwi," she ventured softly one evening as they walked into the quiet courtyard of the safe house, the amber lights glowing warm against the fortified brick.
Who are you, really? Seo Hwi paused at the doorway. He turned, the fading sunlight catching the sharp cut of his jaw and the dangerous, quiet storm in his dark gaze. But when his eyes rested on her, that cold edge vanished, replaced by an unwavering, quiet warmth. "Just someone who will make sure no one ever harms you again," he replied quietly. Fiona held her breath, realizing with every passing day that her gentle savior was no harmless wanderer. He was a sleeping dragon, watching over her. A sharp, unnatural chill cut through the autumn dusk as Fiona locked the front door of the bakery. The streets, usually alive with the clamor of late-night food stalls and bustling neighbors, were eerily abandoned. A heavy stillness pressed against the alleyways, broken only by the low, predatory rumble of idling engines in the distance. Seo Hwi stepped out from the shadows near the corner, his presence as silent as ever. But tonight, the calm ease in his posture was entirely gone. His shoulders were taut, his dark eyes sweeping the perimeter with lethal, razor-sharp focus. Before Fiona could greet him with her usual quiet smile, his hand shot out, gently but firmly pulling her behind the safety of an alcove. "Seo Hwi, what is it?" she whispered, her pulse instantly spiking as she caught the cold tension radiating from him. "Stay down," he murmured, his voice dipping into a low, commanding cadence she had never heard before. "Keep out of sight." Around the bend, blinding high beams cut through the gloom. 3 sleek, black-armored sedans screeched to a halt, completely sealing off both ends of the narrow street. Doors slammed open in unison, and over a dozen men stepped into the glare, brandishing steel pipes and blades, their coats lined with the notorious rival syndicate insignia. Their eyes combed the shadows, ruthless and hungry for blood. "Find him," a gravelly voice barked through the alley. "He's wounded and stripped of his guard. Take his head tonight, and the entire Northern Territory is ours." Fiona's heart slammed violently against her ribs. Fear, sharp, suffocating, and all too familiar, threatened to paralyze her. But as she looked at Seo Hwi, she saw no panic, no hesitation. The quiet wanderer who had gently poured her barley tea was gone. In his place stood an apex predator, coiled to strike. He turned to her, his hand briefly cradling the side of her face to anchor her trembling gaze. "Listen to me, Fiona," he whispered, his eyes blazing with an ancient, dark fire. "Lock the safe house doors from the inside. Do not open them for anyone. No matter what sounds you hear in the dark, do not come looking for me." "No, you can't face all of them alone," she pleaded, reaching for his worn sleeve, terrified of losing the only protector she had ever known. Seo Hwi offered her a faint, unreadable smirk, cool, fearless, and utterly dangerous. "They are the ones who should be afraid." With a swift, fluid motion, he shoved her gently back into the concealed corridor toward the courtyard gate. Before she could utter another word, he melted into the fog and shadows. Seconds later, the violent crash of metal meeting bone and the guttural roars of men echoed into the night, swallowed whole by the relentless darkness.
The iron deadbolt clicked into place, but the safe house felt agonizingly cold. For an hour, Fiona paced the darkened hallway, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every muffled crash and distant siren tearing through the city streets echoed in her mind. He had told her to hide. He had told her not to look for him. But when her father had died, Fiona had stood by helplessly while her world fell apart. She refused to cower in the dark while the only person who had ever protected her bled alone on the cold asphalt. Grabbing a heavy flashlight, Fiona slipped out into the misty night, following the faint scent of rain and scorched rubber. She tracked the silence through the labyrinth of back alleys until she reached the district's abandoned industrial docks. Emerging from behind the rusted shipping containers, the breath caught in her throat. The desolate pier was bathed in the blinding glare of xenon floodlights. A massive convoy of 10 sleek black-armored SUVs formed a protective ring around the asphalt, their engines purring with low mechanical menace. Dozens of imposing men in tailored black suits, earpieces, and pristine white gloves lined the perimeter like an impenetrable fortress. Every single one of them was bowed at the waist, frozen in absolute reverent submission. The air was thick with iron discipline and suffocating authority. At the center of it all stood one man. The threadbare jacket and battered boots were gone. Draped across his broad shoulders was a tailored charcoal overcoat that moved like liquid shadow. A pristine silk tie rested against a crisp black shirt, and his dark hair was swept back with razor-sharp precision, revealing the aristocratic, lethal lines of his face. His demeanor was that of an undisputed emperor. "Chairman Seo," a senior lieutenant said, offering a crisp bow and handing him a leather dossier. "The Northern Syndicate's leadership has been completely neutralized. The traitors who orchestrated the coup during your recovery have been detained. Seoul is firmly beneath your feet once more." The man who gently handed Fiona hot tea and $50 simply gave a curt, imperious nod, tossing the file aside with effortless coldness. Fiona took a sharp, trembling step backward, her boot scuffing against a loose shard of gravel. In a heartbeat, a dozen armed enforcers raised their weapons in unison, their eyes snapping toward the shadows with lethal precision. Fiona froze, terror seizing her lungs. "Lower your weapons." The command cut through the fog like a whip. Chairman Seo Hwi stepped forward, his dark eyes locking onto Fiona's terrified gaze. The icy, terrifying aura that held an entire underworld syndicate in fear dissolved instantly. Ignoring his men, the kingpin of Seoul walked directly toward her, his voice softening into the gentle tone she knew by heart. "Fiona," he whispered, extending his hand. "I told you to stay safe."
The armored convoy moved in absolute silence, cutting through the glittering Seoul skyline toward a secluded glass high-rise overlooking the Ham River. Inside the private penthouse, far removed from the cold alleyways and damp safe houses, the city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds beneath their feet. Yet Fiona stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her hands wrapped tightly around herself, still trying to reconcile the blood-stained drifter who held her hand on the estate steps with the supreme underworld monarch standing before her. Seo Hwi unbuttoned his tailored overcoat, setting it aside. Without the heavy armor of his dark reputation, he turned to face her, his sharp gaze softening into that same quiet gentleness she had come to trust. 3 months ago, an internal betrayal nearly cost me my life, he began, his voice deep and measured. My closest lieutenant staged a coup, poisoning me and ambushing my guard. Wounded and stripped of my resources, I had to vanish completely, living in the gutters, watching the shadows, and waiting for the poison to clear while my loyal men rooted out the rot from within. He took a slow step toward her, pausing to give her space, never wanting to be another monster in her life. The day your stepmother dragged you to the iron gates, I was at my lowest. I intended to walk past that estate unnoticed, but then I saw the way you looked at the world, not with hatred, but with a wounded, unbreakable grace. When she threw that crumpled bill at me, I saw a soul who had been stripped of everything, yet refused to lose her humanity. Fiona's eyes welled with tears as she looked up at him. You let me believe you had nothing, because for the first time in my life I had something pure, Seo Hwi murmured softly, closing the distance between them. He gently reached out, his thumb catching a stray tear rolling down her cheek. His touch was warm and steady, a fortress against the cruel world that had discarded them both. In my world, loyalty is bought by bloodshed and fear. People bow because they are terrified. But you shared your bread with me when I was a nameless ghost. You brought light into that dark house, asked for nothing, and worried for my life tonight. He lowered his hand to gently cover hers, his dark eyes burning with fierce, unshakable devotion. Power means nothing if you have nothing to protect. They cast you out into the dark, Fiona. But as long as I breathe, Seoul's underworld will answer to you, and no one will ever make you feel small again. The grand imperial ballroom blazed under the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers, filled with the laughter and clinking glasses of Seoul's most powerful elite. Evelyn and Chloe glided through the crowd in lavish silk gowns purchased with money stolen from the Vance estate, desperate to cement their place among high society. Evelyn puffed with pride, boasting to wealthy socialites about her family's prestige, while Chloe sneered, reveling in the gilded luxury she believed she rightfully owned. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, the room buzzed with nervous anticipation. The entire room had gathered for one reason, the rare, legendary appearance of Chairman Seo Hwi, the mysterious kingpin who held the city's commerce and underworld in an iron grip. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany door swung open. A heavy, reverent hush fell over the ballroom as a double line of black-suited security guards stepped inside, bowing deeply toward the grand entrance. Evelyn craned her neck, eager to catch a glimpse of the legendary tycoon and beg for his favor. Framed in the doorway stood Chairman Seo Hwi, imposing and devastatingly handsome in a bespoke dark tuxedo that radiated absolute power. But it was not his formidable presence that sent a shockwave through the room. On his arm was a woman of breathtaking elegance. Fiona moved with the quiet grace of a queen, draped in a custom haute couture dress of shimmering midnight blue that caught every light. A brilliant diamond necklace, worth more than the entire Vance estate, glimmered at her collarbone. Her hair fell in soft, dark waves, framing cheeks flushed with health and eyes shining with calm, untouchable dignity. Seo Hwi walked beside her, his hand wrapped possessively around hers, his dark gaze scanning the room with the quiet threat of a predator protecting his sovereign. Across the room, the crystal glass in Evelyn's hand shattered against the marble floor. Blood drained completely from Evelyn's face, her manicured fingers trembling violently as her jaw hung open in horror. Beside her, Chloe's arrogant smile melted into sheer paralyzing terror, her eyes wide as saucers as she stumbled back against a velvet pillar. The worthless stray they had sold for $50 was standing before them, cloaked in unimaginable wealth and ultimate authority. Fiona's eyes swept across the crowded room, locking onto the pale, terrified faces of her former tormentors. She didn't glare, nor did she smirk. Instead, she offered them only a cool, effortless indifference, the look one gives to insignificant dust. Beside her, Seo Hwi's eyes met Evelyn's, a cold, lethal promise gleaming in his gaze that made the older woman's knees buckle. The trap was sprung, and the tables had turned forever.
The relentless autumn downpour returned to Seoul, soaking the iron gates of the massive Seo Hwi estate in icy gray sheets. Within 48 hours of the gala, Chairman Seo Hwi's financial empire had systematically called in every unpaid debt of the Vance estate, foreclosed Arthur's stolen assets, and frozen Evelyn's fraudulent accounts. The gilded palace they had stolen was gone.
Outside the towering front gate, Evelyn and Chloe stood drenched, shivering in sodden coats, their arrogance thoroughly shattered into pathetic desperation. A sleek black umbrella cut through the mist as the reinforced iron gates slowly glided open. Flanked by 4 stone-faced enforcers in tailored suits, Fiona walked forward. She wore an immaculate camel wool coat, her head held high, looking every bit the sovereign her father had raised her to be. Beside her, Seo Hwi held the umbrella steady over her head, his lethal presence a wall of absolute protection. "Fiona, my darling girl!" Evelyn shrieked, throwing herself to her knees in the wet gravel, tears streaking her ruined makeup. "You must save us! The banks took everything! We have nowhere to go! We are your family!" Chloe dropped down beside her mother, weeping uncontrollably, her former cruelty replaced with groveling terror. "Fiona, please! We took you in after Arthur died. You can't leave your own sister on the street." Fiona stopped at the threshold of the gate, looking down at the 2 women who had once treated her like dirt beneath their heels. There was no rage in her dark eyes, nor was there bitter satisfaction. Only a vast, unshakable calm. "Family?" Fiona's voice was smooth, quiet, and carried on the cold wind. "Family does not forge a father's will. Family does not beat a girl to her knees, nor do they sell human dignity for pocket change." She reached into the pocket of her coat and withdrew a single worn $50 bill, the exact note Evelyn had handed to a supposed vagrant on the day of her banishment. Fiona let the bill slip from her fingers, letting it flutter down into the muddy puddle between Evelyn's trembling hands. "You placed a price on my life," Fiona said, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "This is every cent of mercy you will ever receive from me." "Fiona, no! Please!" Evelyn wailed, clawing at the wet stone as the heavy iron gates began to grind shut. Fiona didn't look back. She turned, slipping her arm naturally into Seo Hwi's, meeting the fierce, devoted warmth in his eyes with a genuine smile of her own. As the massive gates locked into place with a thunderous final click, the ghost of Arthur Vance's heiress faded into the rain, replaced forever by a woman who had found her strength, her crown, and her true home.
What an incredible journey of resilience, justice, and finding love where it was least expected. Fiona proved that true strength isn't about cruelty or wealth. It's about rising from the ashes with your dignity intact. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another thrilling tale of revenge, redemption, and high-stakes romance. Turn on that notification bell to be the first in line for our next release. Now, I want to hear from you. Did Fiona make the right call by shutting the gate on Evelyn and Chloe forever, or would you have given them a second chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to tell us which city or country you're watching from. We love connecting with our amazing global community. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.